So what kind of businesses are you seeing out there that are attractive and hitting the market these days? What kind of businesses?
Yeah. So let me break it down this way. 70% of all small businesses, and the SBA calls a small business under 500 employees, which to me is a big business, but it falls
Can
under the
be.
small business. Yeah. So like 70% of all small businesses in America do $1 million or under per year in gross revenue, gross sales,
Mhm.
right? So that's the biggest segment of the market. So when you look at our the metrics on what we sell in a given year, 70% of these businesses do $1 million and under in gross revenue, and that probably puts them in the 200 to sometimes three or $400,000 cash flow, and we use what's called seller discretionary cash flow, or EBITDA. You'll see sometimes EBITDA is usually used when it's a little bit larger company. And then the next segment are businesses that are doing from 1 to 10 million, and that's maybe another 20%, and then maybe the last 10% is doing 10 to 20 million, and that's really Main Street America. The
Mm,
larger companies, you'll the M&A advisors do a lot of the larger companies that are doing
right.
50 million, 100 million in revenue. Those are a little bit different deals. These are truly Main Street American businesses, independently owned, family run, whatever it may be. And so when you look at the market like that, and the sweet spot are these businesses that are doing 6, 7, 8 million in revenue and kicking out, maybe 500 to $1 million of cash flow. You put that out in the market, you're going to get a ton of interest, but it's a
Wow.
smaller
Yeah.
population. So, people love to buy those businesses. There's just not as many out there. And that goes
Sure.
back to why, a lot of these businesses that are only doing 1 million in revenue a year are great little businesses, kick out a couple 100,000 of cash flow, but you got to run it. That's not an investment type business where you just go purchase a business and expect a check in the mail every month, as we talked about before.
Right. So those businesses, when we look at them, how do you price those kind of businesses? So I mean, if it's $1 million in revenue and they're kicking out 2 or 300,000 in cash flow each year, what would a buyer expect to pay for something like that? And we know it's not, we're looking for ranges here.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's so many different ways to value a business, which makes part of what I do a little bit challenging. But the basic rule of thumb, and this is the way the SBA banks work, as an
Okay.
example, right? So a buyer wants to buy a business, the SBA typically needs 10% down. And when I say the SBA, I want to clarify something. The SBA does not actually lend money. So your local banks lend money, but under the SBA platform, which basically
The
guarantees.
regulations that they're following, right?
Yeah, and it insures or guarantees the loan up to 70%. So if
Oh,
there's a default, so if somebody buys $1 million company through a bank and there's a default and they have to close down the company or whatever, the SBA will guarantee 70% of that to the bank. So
got it.
a buyer can put 10% down. The bank's risk there is like 20%, but the banks actually lend money under the SBA platform. So that's how that works. And it's a process. It can take 8 to sometimes 16 weeks to go through that process of an SBA uh,
Approval.
approval, fund bank lending, that whole scenario. So the way the SBA looks at these deals, the way banks look at these deals, the way the market works for the most part is businesses are sold on a multiple of their cash flow.
Ah,
So when I say cash flow, again, it's either seller discretionary earnings for little smaller companies, or EBITDA is something you'll hear a lot on a little bit of larger companies. And really the difference is in how the owner compensates themselves at the end of the day. So an EBITDA number might be a smaller number, but it has a higher multiple. And the SD number might be higher, but a smaller multiple. So it all kind of works out the same. And typically what you see in the market is a range of anywhere from a 1x, 1 times multiple. So if you're doing 200,000 in seller discretionary earnings and you get a 1x multiple, you're selling the company for 200,000. 1x to 4x is probably where most of these businesses that are doing less than 10 million a year in revenue land. So if again, you're doing 200,000 and you get a 3x multiple, you're selling it for 600,000. So that's the basic premises of how businesses are sold and valued.
Got it. That is an excellent explanation on how businesses are sold because, the buyer thinks, oh my gosh, or excuse me, the seller thinks, oh my gosh, I've put my, blood, sweat, tears, nights, weekends into this company, right?
Yep.
30 years worth of time. What? I'm only going to get 1 to 4 times the cash flow that comes out of it. So they tend
Yep.
to be a little disappointed sometimes on it, which is why I'm always working to make sure that they're getting cash flow up as high as they can and make the business as profitable as they can. And they're taking money out of the company rather than keep feeding it in. But that's a whole nother conversation. But it's like the poor seller thinks, oh, at 30 years into the business, I should get, a lot more money out of it. But it's better than closing down and walking away, right?
Exactly.